question? A few. So basically all this means is it's polluted waterways from too many excess minerals. So I'm not really surprised that a group like you, I know this is unfortunate, I'm not really surprised that a group like you has heard of so many of these challenges, but can anyone guess sort of what the red thread is between, or that ties together all of these challenges? So does anyone want to guess at what a common driver behind all of these things like climate, biodiversity loss? Humans, but what specifically about what humans do? Food? Yes, exactly. So food is the single largest driver of environmental change. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm a researcher in sustainable food systems. And if you wonder what a food system is, basically that's just anything related to food. So all the activities and people and processes that it takes to get food from land and seas to our mouths. It's also all the impacts of what we produce, consume, and waste. So today, I guess I just really wanted to zoom out a little bit just from the climate crisis and the climate emergency and talk a little bit about the larger planetary emergency that we're having and why food is such an important part of this. And so I'm going to touch on 5 different things today. So one, I'll give you a few more hard facts on why food is so linked to this environmental challenge. Then I want to explain exactly how much there is to gain if we fix our food systems. The third thing is I hear a few very common myths about food and sustainability, so I just wanted to talk about those. Fourth, I'll talk a little bit about what we should be demanding of our leaders, but then also we all have some agency, and so I'll talk a little bit about what we all can do with through food. So the first thing is, why is food really such an important part of the environmental challenge? So let me get my notes here to make sure I don't get any of these wrong. So when it comes to climate, food is responsible for about 21 to 37% of global greenhouse gases. So this is quite a lot. And it's expected to rise to about 30 to 40% by 2050 if we just keep on producing, consuming, and wasting how we do today. So food is a really big part of the climate crisis that you all are very connected with. When it comes to biodiversity, so we know that the food system is one of the core drivers between deforestation, habitat loss, biodiversity loss. So for example, producing is just quite simply very unsustainable. So we need to make sure that our food production is staying within environmental boundaries. And the good news is scientists have actually quantified what these boundaries should be, specifically for food systems. So we know what to do. And I guess from all these examples of the impacts of food, it should be very clear that food touches way beyond climate. So you guys probably know very well that the health of the planet is just like the health of your body. There's not one health indicator to tell you if your body is healthy, and there's not just one health indicator to tell if the planet is healthy. The thing about food is that it's putting so much pressure on so many things that feed into the health of the planet. So this is a bit scary in one way, but it also means that it can be a very powerful solution. So 2, I want to talk a little bit about what exactly we have to gain if we do fix our food systems. And so far I've really just talked about environmental impacts. So sure, if we fix our food systems, then we'll be tackling climate change and land use change and biodiversity loss and water pollution and all of these things. But think about how much food touches every aspect of your lives. So food not only supports the environmental pillar of sustainability, but also social and economic pillars of sustainability. So for example, if we give female farmers the same access to resources, land, financing as males, then that will help greatly improve gender equality, which is a cornerstone of social sustainability. If we invest in smallholder farmers, then we can lift 2 billion individuals out of poverty around the world. So this is really key to economic sustainability. And I could really go on and on and on all day just with examples of how fixing food could change these different aspects. But it boils down to this, really, that fixing our food systems isn't just going to help the climate crisis, and it's not even going to stop at the planetary emergency. Fixing food is really going to help us on the way to sustainable development. So we're going to have healthy individuals, a healthy planet, healthy societies, healthy economies. And the great news about this is that you can convince nearly anyone to fix food systems and you'll get the environmental impact or the environmental benefit. So if someone cares about health, someone's worried about their diet-related health or that of a family member, then you can use the health argument for them to fix food systems and you'll still get your environmental benefit. If someone is worried about the economy and that's the only thing they care about, tell them about the $12 trillion that we waste from dysfunctional food systems. And if they change them, you'll get your environmental benefit too. So that's a really good thing about food, is that you can come with so many different motivations to fix it, but still get that environmental benefit. And then I think this leads me on to point 3, a few common myths about food and sustainability. I was not factoring in the wind here. Okay, the first common myth that I often hear is we all need to be vegan. So everyone in the world needs to stop eating meat. And the reasoning is that cows produce a lot of greenhouse gases. We all know we need to reduce our greenhouse gases. Stop eating meat. So it seems like a very plausible argument. But when meat is done right, there is a place for it in sustainable food systems to support livelihoods and healthy diets. So, for example, in Sweden, the largest proportion of red-listed species are in agricultural lands, for example, those that cows graze. So if cows are allowed to graze and maintain those lands, then they basically save those home for those species that are there. Also, cows can transform energy on land that we can't use to grow food and make it into food that we can eat. The obvious problem is that this utopia of how livestock is produced doesn't always happen, right? It's produced in very unsustainable ways and unsustainable limits. But done right, there is a place. Same thing when it comes to the diet. A lot of people say there's no place in a healthy diet. You can eat small amounts or no amounts of meat and still have a healthy diet. Here in Sweden, we eat about 7 to 8 times more the sustainable limit. So a big research report showed that we can eat about 100 grams of just red meat every week. So this is like 1 hamburger a week. And so in Sweden, and this is common across the Nordics, it is true that most people will need to really dramatically reduce how much red meat they're eating. In other parts of the world, they may be eating no red meat, little animal source foods, and these could actually provide very vital nutrients that they need. So I think it's a cautionary tale against blanket statements of what we need to do in our food systems. So sure, that argument holds a lot in Sweden and the Nordics, but maybe not everywhere in the world. So we just have to be a little bit careful about what we are suggesting. The second common myth is we have to buy local food only. So the reasoning here, again, is that you produce greenhouse gases when you transport food around the world. And sure you do. And if you want to buy local food because you have a local farmer, because you know that Sweden has very strict animal welfare regulations, because you know Sweden has some of the lowest chemical use in agriculture, go for it. That's fine. But the emissions from transport in the food system are absolutely dwarfed by emissions from production and what we choose to produce. And we also have to realize sometimes we use global food systems to get nutrients to people who can't grow those nutrients in their areas. And sometimes we use global food systems to source foods when there have been very local natural disasters. And sometimes we use food systems to produce foods in a more resource efficient way. So we can imagine that potentially growing coffee and bananas and oranges, chocolate, I like a lot of these things, I wouldn't want to give them up. Maybe that's not the most efficient to grow right here in Sweden. So I think the point of this myth is that there is no local global debate. We don't need one or the other. We need them all. We just need all levels of the food system to be working towards sustainability, and they're not doing that right now. And the last myth that I commonly hear is that people have a lot of silver bullet solutions to offer around food systems. So what works? So I hear a lot of people say, producers just all switch to organic agriculture, we would be fine. If all cities have vertical gardens in them, then we would be saved. If we just change our diets, if we just stop wasting food, if we just. But there is no one answer. We're gonna need a lot of different ambitious activities going on at the same time if we want to bring our food systems within environmental limits. But also, food systems are very context specific, as I was saying. So some type of production, like organic production, might work really well in one place, and it might not work very well in another place. And if you're a researcher like me, who works with food systems, I think one thing that you catch yourself saying a lot is, well, it depends, or well, it's complex. And it is true that it is very, very complex. But there's no one-size-fits-all solution. So we need to be aware of what we're promoting in food systems and where we're doing that. And now, you might be thinking, if everything about a food system is so complex, how do I know what to do? How do I know what food to choose when I go into a grocery store? How do I know what the right thing is? And this brings me to my fourth point, what we should be demanding of our leaders. Because quite simply, food systems are too complex, and individuals will never have all the information they need to make sure that every one of your food choices is the right choice for the environment. This problem is too large, and we need really systemic changes that are upstream, and we need those to be enacted by people with a lot of power in food systems. So, for example, businesses really need to change their offers, and they also need to change the environments where we buy food. So that means they need to change food retails, grocery stores when you go into them, restaurants, other food outlets, kitchens, school kitchens, a lot of these types of things. And then they also need to make sure that the most sustainable option is the most affordable, the most attractive, the tastiest, the most available, the easiest possible choice. That's not your job. That's their job. That's their responsibility. And we also need our policymakers to do quite a few things. So one, we need them to make a strong commitment that recognizes food systems are really important if we want planetary health. Second, we need them to set some really tough targets to guide action and give us some guidance. Specifically, we need sustainable dietary guidance. So not just what do we eat for health, but what do we eat for the health of us and the planet. And the third thing we need them to do is then come up with and implement a whole package of policies that goes beyond just informational campaigns. So we often hear, if you just educated people a little bit more on what they should be eating, then everything will be fixed. The science is absolutely clear that information alone will not work for sustained change. So we need them because they're the ones that are able to enact regulations, they're the ones who are able to do fiscal measures, they're the ones who are able to create policies and partnerships. So we really do need some of these very powerful actors in food systems to step up, take their part, and take accountability. But you might be asking, what can you as an individual do? Because we can all help through food to improve sustainability. The first thing I'm going to say is to vote. I have to say this as an American staring down a November election. I'm sure you all know it's important to vote people in who believe in science, who believe in climate change, who believe in the importance of fixing our environment. I realize that many people I'm talking to right now can't vote yet, and I know that you've probably already made the decision that when you can vote, you will vote for these people who understand. But you also may have friends, and you also may have followers who are in a position to vote relatively soon in some sort of election. So you can always encourage them to do the right thing. The second thing is what you can do with your diet. So of course, one thing is this animal source foods. So if you do choose to eat them as part of your diet, make sure they are within these environmental limits. I mentioned the 100 grams per week of red meat, and if you want to discuss later, I can tell you some other rough values as guides of what we can eat for both the planet and sustainability. Another thing you can do is just not overconsume. So if you can already imagine the pressure that food production is putting on the planet. And we also have millions of people going hungry and billions more mouths to feed coming up in the next decades. So we can all help by not overeating. This is also going to help our health, given that 50% of adults in Sweden are overweight or obese, and 1 in 7 children. So it's going to be a win-win. And the other thing you can do is consuming discretionary foods. So these basically are junk foods, things like candy, chips, beloved Lorda goodness, right? So these are things that provide very, very little nutritional value to you. They also take resources to produce, right? So again, if we need to feed so many people, then we should be thinking, what do we need to eat for a nutritious diet? And again, this is a win-win for our health and for sustainability. The great thing is you don't have to choose between eating a healthy diet and eating a sustainable diet. There will of course be exceptions, because food wouldn't be food unless it was complex. But so we really need to make sure that, for example, we can use apps now to find food that is about to be wasted and save it. We can look up recipes. We can not buy more than we need and things like that. A fourth thing you can do is, if you haven't been learning about sustainable food and sustainable diets in schools, you can ask why. You can ask your teachers, you can ask your principals, you can ask those in charge, why are we not learning about something that is so central to at least 5 different pillars of environmental sustainability, not to mention our social sustainability, societal sustainability, our economic sustainability, and so much more. Ask them why. Put a little pressure on them. And the 5th thing is just keep doing what you're doing, because advocacy really can be a strong leverage point, and we can't give up. So that's all I have, but I'm here to answer some questions if you have it. But again, just thank you so much. It's really cool to be out here with you today. Does anyone have any questions?
You talked about how... Oh, okay. You talked about how a vegan diet isn't the only sustainable choice. Does that mean that a vegan diet is about as sustainable, or in some ways more sustainable, at least in our context? Or would you actually say that eating some meat might be better than none at all?
So, I think if you want to be a vegan, it can be a healthy diet, but there are nutrients that you get from meat that you can't get from other things. So you just need to be aware, if you're not eating meat, to make sure that those are available. In terms of sustainability, it really depends what you're replacing meat with in your diet and how it's produced. So of course, and some studies have been done to show that vegetarian diets could be, for example, more land intensive and use more land than some diets with low amounts of meat. In general, animal source foods will have a greater environmental impact. But I think we have to balance human health and planetary health and realize that it's not always, so for example, if you're eating a lot of like nuts from California, these aren't necessarily sustainable. And the other thing you eat are all of your vegetables are grown in greenhouses or by fossil fuels, and they're flown from the other side of the world. I mean, you could imagine scenarios where a vegetarian or a vegan diet is also not super sustainable. But I think very low amounts of red meat, low to moderate amounts of other animal source foods, and these have been shown, at least through one big global study, to fit both within our environmental boundaries of what the earth can hold and make sure that everyone gets a nutritious diet.
Okay, but it doesn't mean that a conscious vegan diet would negatively affect a person or the planet in any way more than a meat diet would.
Well, again, some of these foods could be more resource intensive.
Yeah, I mean like conscious in a way, like researched and like I can have a vegan diet that is more sustainable if I take care of it a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you can also have a vegan diet that's very sustainable. Of course you can.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. I'm not saying that if you want to be a vegan, go for it. If you want to do that for health reasons, if you want to do that for animal rights reasons, go for it. I often just hear blanket statements that everyone around the world needs to stop eating meat, and that's where we get into just a little bit of trouble.
Okay, thanks.
Because
especially in countries where they eat very low amounts of red meat and have very little access to the producing and the way we're producing it, not good. Major changes. But like most things with food, it's never an all or nothing.
Is now discussing about the agriculture politics and policies, and it doesn't look very good because there are so many big players like Monsanto and so on. Could you say something about this? I mean, because this is a factor, obviously, which is influencing the whole political system. Like, what are these global big players doing to the food system?
Yeah. So when it comes to the common agricultural policy, which at least Sweden is under, but not all Nordic countries, a big issue with this is subsidies and what kinds of food production they are subsidizing and what production methods they are subsidizing. And people are often saying these are promoting, for example, meat production, dairy production, things that aren't very sustainable. So this has been flagged as a major issue, and many people find it very frustrating because it's not something you can change in Sweden, even if it impacts the farmers here and you might want to change something. This is something decided at the EU level. I can't say so much about the political influence of other groups because it's not my research field. But certainly, I mean, there's big players who have interests in the food system, and I guess what I can say is that when I've worked with some companies and big companies, there are big companies who have amassed great power and influence in food systems who realize that sustainability is the only way forward. And so I think working with them and supporting them to drag others along, whether they like it or not, will be key. So you can get disheartened when you looked at advocacy of big global interests, but there's also some slivers of hope that some of these actors are realizing they're out of business if the ecosystem collapses. So
do you have any thoughts on GMO?
No, not really. I haven't looked into the evidence. Nah, I'm gonna skip that one. So that all of our solutions, we have to think in a very systemic way. So, you know, even for food systems, they're probably not going to be fixed unless we tackle some of these big things like, well, they have to go basically carbon neutral. They can't produce any carbon dioxide. So that's a whole nother sector that has to change just for food systems to get it right. Just like the economic system, that whole system's going to have to change for food systems to get it right. So I think I'm totally dancing around your question, but I think it just illustrates how much we have to think in these very systemic terms. But I also think there's a big issue around the true cost of food and how this has played into it. And obviously we know that so many of the social, environmental externalities of producing food is not reflected in the price, and this is just creating a very negative spiral. So, I mean, this is something that's very big that will have to be fixed, and I know people are interested in it, but it is a bit difficult to commit just as one company, or, you know, that's why you need these large-scale actors at national, at EU, at international level coming together and recognizing how connected these issues are. I'm sorry, that was probably very dissatisfying.
Feels like there's never enough money for all of our troubles, but there's more than enough resources on Earth. Shouldn't we, and political system is too slow at arriving at decisions. Shouldn't we try to find a system that's, you know, sustainable, like resource-based economy that's already proposed by a group called the Venus Project, if you maybe know about them?
Well, I guess one thing is we don't have enough resources on our planet, so we are drastically and very quickly running out of many resources that we do need. But of course, I mean, there is lots of research on bioeconomy and how we can go to, you know, more bioeconomy-based societies or circular economy-based societies. Of course, like, we need to have a drastic change in our systems. It's not something that is going to get fixed just by tweaks in the margins. So if we largely stay within the system that we have now and just try to optimize it, of course, that's not going to get us where we want. We need another model. Mm-hmm. I also agree that policy moves really slowly sometimes. And that's why it's not just one answer. So I don't want to put all of my hope on policymakers, just like I don't want to put all my hope on businesses, just like I don't want to put all my hope that you guys have to be the ones standing out here fixing it. So I think it's really that many people have to push for these systemic changes until it becomes unavoidable.
Policymakers at the table, and you had world leaders, and you had Bayer, and all those guys sitting there. What would you tell them? What would you tell them if you could speak as frank as you wanted?
Wow. Well, I mean, one thing, they just have to commit to making, if I'm only allowed to speak on food, then they have to commit to making food systems, I guess, basically carbon neutral. I mean, that's a huge thing to do. But then I think they need to set targets for what exactly does a sustainable food system look like. Tell people to change when they don't know how far they have to go. It's hard to tell an individual if you're like, eat a sustainable diet. It's kind of like this. And businesses aren't going to change unless they have hard targets. We need some hard targets. It's not like these haven't been proposed, so they have something to go off. So they need to make the commitment. They need to set these targets, and then they really need to step up and regulate and use every tool in their toolbox. So regulation isn't the only thing you can do. Partnerships can be very powerful. Other types of measures can be very powerful, but they need to commit to using everything at their disposal to get the food system within those targets. That's going to mean regulating business more. That's going to mean complete overhauls of their energy sectors. So, I mean, those would be dreams, I guess.
Yes, it feels like if they don't really have understood the whole complexity of the issue, it's going to end up in them being victims to lobbyists for these big international groups, and nothing is going to happen. In the end, all those targets are just words, and no one is checking how much they follow up on those targets, and in the end it was just beautiful words to keep the some of us quiet,
Yeah.
so to speak.
So I think it's very clear that whoever's supposed to be meeting the target is not necessarily the best person to be setting the target, which, I mean, we've seen throughout history, many examples. So I agree, like making sure that these are developed in a science-based way and that they're legitimate, that there's enough funding. I mean, it takes a lot of money and resource to monitor, evaluate, and then hold people accountable. So they actually need to start investing a lot more. And maybe they agree too. But yeah, I agree with everything you're saying.
How much of a difference can consumers make on a global scale in comparison to producers?
So I guess the thing is, consumers have an important role in shifting demand. So producers often say they can't do any changes because their consumers aren't demanding it. Which, when you think about it, I think it's kind of difficult to argue that we're supposed to be demanding things that they aren't even producing and that aren't on the shelf. If we signal our demand through what we buy, it's really hard to demand things that they're not selling. So I think in that way, consumers do have a large role in changing the demand of what we want and making sure that when those products come out that are healthier and sustainable, or it's not even products, I mean, there's a lot of commodities, loose commodities as well, that are healthy and sustainable, to support those. So I would say that's one of the biggest impacts that people can have, and I guess through that demand, then producers would change.
So consumers don't necessarily make their change through their individual choices, but more through...
Sorry, what?
Consumers don't necessarily make their change through their individual choices, more of a demand from producers?
Well, I guess your individual choices are your demand, so they are what you buy at a grocery store. Right? So, if you're signaling to them, basically. I mean, it's incredible how much data they have on and how closely they watch what people buy and trends that change and adding new products in response to that. Like, it's incredible. So I think your individual choices reflect your demand in that way. But there are obviously limits to that,
right?
And it really needs to be complemented. There is no one thing. That it's all of them. It's policy, it's businesses, and it's individuals. It's all of them together.
Well, consumer power. I remember very clearly when we got the first ecological product in a Swedish Coop shop. It was bananas. And they were ecological and they were very much more expensive. And some people took that, extra price and paid that just to show where they stood in this question. And now we have so many more ecological products. So in a way, even though ecological products may not be 100% perfect either.
Yeah.
But at least it's a statement where we want to go, and that's sort of consumer power. We can actually put pressure on with our choices in our everyday lives.
Yeah, definitely you can.
I have a question to something you said quite at the beginning, or like about the difference between global and, or that it's not always best to buy locally. But how do I, as a consumer, know which choice is best? Like, I've heard that a banana in the winter might be more sustainable than or in spring than an apple from last year because it doesn't have to be cooled all the time. How do I know when the transport and the way it was manufactured somewhere else is better than the local choice?
Yeah, so this is a fantastic point to exemplify. A consumer will never have the information they need, and this is why those people who have the power to shape the food system have to make that decision the easiest choice. It's impossible. There is just not enough transparency or labeling regulations for you as a consumer to go in. And even if you know the commodity, and even if you know the type of food, bananas may be better at this time, you don't know the production system, you don't know the on-ground production system. And so, yeah, you can choose in broad strokes to know what is in season, or, you know, you can, and you also, you know, can base this on a lot of other things than just the environment. So I know a lot of people just like to buy from these more local, I forget what you call them in Sweden, these like straight from producer to, it's like Rinko or maybe this is it, yeah. So I know that a lot of people like to do this just because it supports those farmers. And so again, all of our choices on food are a very complex mix of drivers, right? So if you have a strong conviction for one thing, whether that's animal rights or you don't want chemicals in your food or whatever it is, buy on that and do the best you can, but also demand of the people who are responsible for that choice, demand that they make that the easiest choice.
We want to know that what we're eating is not ruining our lives. No thanks.
So we use capitalism now for like many years, and it's like a foundation for most of the problems that we have. And I don't really think we can change many things in this free market capitalism economy. It just doesn't deal with intelligent management of the resources. So I think we need systematic changes. Like really, you need to do research on the resource-based economy because they have it all figured out. And this is something we need to put the focus on, I think. Because patchwork will not work. This system is too old. It doesn't fit the circumstances anymore.
So I guess, I mean, there's a lot of, I guess the comforting fact is there is a lot of research on post-growth, on all of these different types of economic systems that we could have. The disheartening fact is we have a lot of research on a lot of different things, and that doesn't mean that anyone listens to researchers. I think the lack of research is usually not the problem. It's that there are vested interests in keeping us. So well, some of these vested interests are very scientifically literate and choosing to have a vested interest against that science anyway. So, yeah, I think if you want to make systemic changes, you always have to figure out what is important to the people who are keeping the system as it is, and how do we get them to change? And I don't have that answer, unfortunately. Wish I did.
Yeah, it's crazy, huh? Every country have their researchers, but when they come with an answer that is not comfortable, we choose not to listen to them.
It's really complex. I mean, it's interesting for me as an American coming here and having actually so much access to policymakers. I'm blown away by how interested policymakers are in what we're researching. And very stark contrast. But that's still, even if they're interested, even if they're coming to us, even if they're asking us to do certain analyses, this still doesn't mean, with the bureaucracy that's in place, with the systems that are in place, still doesn't mean that things necessarily have to change.
That's why we say politics is an obsolete way to derive decisions. I mean, we could do that with computers nowadays. You can have sensors in all the sectors on Earth, and just computer makes a decision that's the best for environment and the people. But if you have monetary system, then it's in the interest of capital. That's just simple as that.
Yeah, I guess I don't have the right answer. That's a bit of a bigger discussion, but
you needed to go as well, huh?
What time is it?
I don't know, but it's one.
Yeah.
And Rodrigo needs to cut, and maybe you need to talk, or I don't know. I need to go run.
Yeah, I'm getting really.
Thank you.
Thanks for all your questions. Sorry I couldn't answer so many of them. But yeah, I guess also if you do have any follow-up questions, you're always free to email me. You can either just Google my name with Stockholm Resilience Center and you should find me, but it's also pretty easy. It's just amanda.wood@su.se. I guess you have it and you can send it along. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
It's so nice to have a captive audience.